And now we're going to look at a web framework, which is Express.js. Express.js, which is essentially a web framework for Node.js. And, I'm going to actually shift over. So I've installed Node.js on an Ubuntu box. You may decide to do it on Windows as well. There are easy installers for that. And I already have Express pre-installed. So we're not going to go through the installation, but you should be able to see my screen where I have Ubuntu running. Okay, so what we will do over here is we will create a very simple Express application. So if I go Express, sorry, let me see what I have. I do have Hello World. I'm just going to remove the Hello World app. Okay. So what this has done is this has created a basic installation framework and an application called, it has created some prepackaged folders. There's a package.json, which we're not going to cover in detail now, but it simply says how we can, what are the dependencies for this application, what are the libraries required. And, it has created a couple of public folders. It has created something called routes and something called views, which, people who are familiar with the MVC architecture may know. Now what I'll do is I'll go to Hello World, right? And npm install. So what this does, and as you can see, is based on Express again, which is a web framework, it actually gets all the required packages that are done. And because if you see I've done npm install, it's getting the packages only specific to this directory. So I'm not touching anything else. I'm not breaking any other installation. So I've been able to create a project. I'm able to get libraries which run only in the specific folder. And this is again very, very nice and very, very powerful. I've tried doing this in PHP on Perl, where you do server-side installs, where you install it on the full server, and it kind of breaks everybody else's installation. Okay. Now, once we have done this, I'm quickly going to shift over to my. So I'm just using basic, a basic IDE, Notepad++. Some of you may be familiar with it. So I'll go to Hello World, app.js. Sorry. There you go. So this is the default one. I'm just going to actually replace it with a very, very simple Hello World application. So what you can see over here is in the app.js, where I'm saying, get the Express application. And what I'm saying is, create an application where Express is creating a server. So a very basic server. I have actually defined a route here, the simplest route, where it says, for my root, I have defined an anonymous function with request, which takes in request and response. The first parameter is the request REQ, and then the response. And in the response, I'm simply sending hello world with a couple of HTML tags. And then thing, create a server, listen on port 8080, and simply console.log that I am listening to this server over here. So what we will do over here is, after installing, go Node. So just a quick brief about Ubuntu. When you actually install Node.js on Ubuntu, you may have to type Node.js, right? So as you can see, I'm using version. So what I've done is I've created a symlink to Node, because a lot of the packages will require you to type Node instead of Node.js. Because of Ubuntu's package management, there's a name conflict, so you can't install it with Node, you have to install it with Node.js. But you can simply create a symlink with the name Node to help you with package installations. Again, we will cover these intricacies, as a part, and these kind of intricacies will be explained to you in the installation guide specific to the operating system when you take the course. Okay, so what we have seen so far is we used Express to create a basic template. We have replaced the main application.js with a very, very simple Node backend with a very simple route, which says, when I do a request, a get function for the root, simply send hello world and listen on port 8080. What I will do now is go node app, and it says, the Express server is listening on port 8080 in dev mode. Just gonna go 1.2.40.80, and there you go. It's a very, very simple example. It simply prints out hello world, but as we all know, this is how it essentially starts. All right. So we've looked at a very simple example. So as you can see, so somebody was asking me about Java. Now compared, I know that if you're using, maybe Tomcat, it's easier now with servlets and so on. But if you look at it with NPM and Node.js, you have a server running. You've defined a static route over here, and you're sending it out. And this allows you to actually create, easily create RESTful applications. Now, obviously, I'm not advocating you put in all your routes in a single file, but this allows you to very, very simply create routes and create, REST services, using Node. Okay, I'm going to now stop the server. Now we will look at a more involved example of Node. So I have a question from Vamsi as well, a very interesting one. If an application needs transaction support, can we use Node.js? Now bear in mind that Node.js by itself does not do the transaction. Now typically for transactional systems, you are going to use a database of some kind. You are going to be using either, you could be using Oracle, you could be using SQL, MySQL. If you're a fan of NoSQL, you'll go Cassandra and so on. So the question, the short answer to Vamsi's question is absolutely you can use transaction support, because your transactional support is going to be provided by your backend system. Now let's take an example as to what happens. Suppose a customer purchases something and does an action. He clicks on submit or clicks on buy or something along those lines. That Express is sent off to Node.js. That particular action is sent off to Node.js. This will send off an asynchronous call to the server. And what typically will happen on your front end is you're going to have a loader spinning. Right, you're going to have a loader spinning, while the transactional system, which could be MySQL, which could be anything, does its task. When the transactional system comes back with an answer with a positive confirmation, right? You can send that confirmation back to the front end, and the spinner stops, and you see the confirmation success message. Or, what we're going to be looking at is, alternatively, if your confirmation times out, you can have a timeout function set in your JavaScript itself, so that if you don't get the confirmation, you can simply say that a confirmation has failed and take it on from there. But the beauty is, while you are seeing the spinner, the actual Node.js application thread has moved on and was able to service maybe 50 other clients, right, while padding off the request, the transactional request to the database system. So I hope that answers the question, Vamsi, in terms of that yes, an application can support, a Node.js application can support transactions. It's just that you have to be clear to the user on how you actually do it. A traditional app using PHP, you would send the request, that particular connection would wait, it would poll and come back. But here it's kind of just sent off, and once the confirmation comes in, or if it times out, that message is given to the user. Okay. So the question is, event processors will process I/O events parallelly. Yeah, yes. So the way it happens is the I/O events themselves are sent off to a thread pool. So so what the Node.js event will do is any I/O specific event, any I/O call. So say you're writing to a file as an asynchronous call and give a callback function, and that will be sent off. So yes, it kind of what it does is Node is still using threads internally. It uses something called lib event to manage its internal threading. stuff, but the main core thread itself is, runs in a single loop. I hope, I've been able to answer that question, Vamshi. Okay, so I'm just going to, move on. And so we'll just come back to our example. Vamshi, I'll come back to you and maybe we can have a discussion on this, after the webinar as well. And, what I'll do is actually I'll send you, something along the lines which will answer your question around how, how Node.js is actually more efficient as compared to a, traditional server, client server using threads. Okay, so we looked at a very simple example. Right now we'll look at a slightly more involved example, which involves routes and so on. So before I do that, what I'm going to do is we will see how easy. So for example, I use the hello world, right? I'm just going to edit it right here. If you see package.json, which is essentially a way for my application to show you, what I've used. So what I'm saying here is now my application hello world has a dependency on socket.io, and I'm saying, I need the latest version of socket.io, that is. So once I've added it to my package.json, I go npm install. So it's actually going to install, socket.io right over there. So you can see it's getting it in real time and installing it out. And I have it ready. Now what I'm going to do next is I've opened up my app.js. This is the main app.js, and again I'm going to put in a template, and this will be more familiar to people who have again over here I'm saying I need Express, I need route, I need an HTTP server, and I also need socket.io. I'm listening on port 3000, and I've created a server, and I've basically configured my application where I'm saying, my view engine is Jade. I am using, please use the views folder to pick up my views. My static content can be fetched from my public folder, and then, a couple of other, router and other functionality done using Jade, right? And then, I've said connection, and one of the main things that I do is, if you see io.line right here on line 32, once you have a connect, I get the address of the remote, and I say a new user has connected from this address. So before I go on with this example, I'm just going to quickly skip back to the presentation. So we've looked at Express.js, we've looked at the web frame, we've looked at npm package manager, right? And we're going to look at Jade template right now, and I'm going to talk about what is Jade. Jade is essentially a framework. It helps bind data. So in a way, it's similarly it's a view and a templating engine that you can use with Node.js. So it helps you easily bind the data from the backend to the HTML view. You can use reusable modules and layouts, very similar to MVC, and basic conditions, iterations, loops, and so on. So, there are a lot of JavaScript templating engines available, and we're just going to take a very, very brief look at Jade in this webinar. So, Jade is a simple JavaScript templating engine. No config has to be set up. We saw it was available. It supports dynamic code, and it has template inheritance, which is a very powerful feature. You can have a master template and kind of inherit different templates based on the master template, and then it allows you to come into reusable functions that can run into server. Now, this is a very powerful feature and allows you to actually create templates which will run on web clients which are not very, very powerful. This allows you to actually create nice HTML applications which will run on low-end smartphones. If you are using something like pure Angular or pure HTML5 JavaScript, you will run into a problem when you go on a low end or even on a medium-sized smartphone where you feel that your web page has become sluggish and JavaScript are taking time. Here we are looking at an example of Jade syntax. It's very straightforward. HTML head, you give a title, we have a body, we give the type h1 header 1, we give a div, a paragraph, some content, and so on. And as you can see, Jade will simply render it into plain HTML. Tabs and spaces are very important for Jade. Do not mix tabs and spaces. Jade, in a way, is like Python, where the indentation makes a difference. Okay, we have a question where we're saying that who will be taking the Node.js course from a user who has already completed the Hadoop course. So we will actually have industry experts who take our courses. So whoever, the person who will be taking the Node.js course is someone who's actually used Node.js and who's actually deployed applications and worked on actual commercial projects using Node.js. So whatever you learn instructor is actually the best practice that is followed in the in the real world out there. These are not just academic exercises. You are going to be actually looking at the project will actually be a real world scenario, and you will be taught real world concepts, the pain points that they have faced, and what they did to handle those points. So, and not only that, one of our features is if you've taken our course and say even 2 months or 3 months or 4 months later, say a Node.js application or deployment for a client or for your employer, and you run into a problem, even at that point in time, you can get in touch with our support and say, hey, look, I'm trying to do this, and I'm facing this problem. Can you help me out? And our support team will take care of your request. And if it's even if it's complex, we will actually escalate it to the instructor, who will take a look at your request and help you out with that. So that is the kind of support you expect to get from us, if you go on our courses. Okay, so coming back to Jade, so we've seen how a simple Jade example where we are converting a Jade view or template into HTML. So this was the simple example of Hello World, and we are doing something a little bit more complex. And as you can see over here, it requires Express. We define a simple route. We send Hello World. We've looked at this in the previous example. So before we do that, so I'm just going to finish out the example we started on. So we defined a simple route. So over here, as you can see, once a socket is connected, I take the handshake address, and and I simply say this is a welcome message from Node.js. What I'm going to do next is JS. So you guys can see my screen. So this is simply a client JavaScript. Now this will actually run on my browser. So the script you see over here, I'm just going to show it up again. It's a simple socket connect, and it just says, this will be sent actually to the browser. We'll see it once we get there. So this will be running on the browser, which is why I've kept it in the JavaScript folder. And finally, I'm going to, in the view, so in the view, in the Jade view, all I've said is, please include this particular JavaScript, socket.io and client.js. Once I've done that, So I run Node. It's running on port 3000. Just gonna open a new one. Right? As you can see, it says welcome to Express. Sorry, I think I have made. Just 1 second. There's a little typo over there. Forgot the slash. There we go. App. Reload. So you can see the welcome to Express. This is rendered by the Jade template. And if you look at my console, you can see that I've actually gotten a JavaScript, object back, where it says simply, this is a welcome message from Node.js. So if you see this message over here, right now I'm simply printing it on to the console. But if you look at the app.js over here, where we were, emitting a JavaScript object, so JSON, in the JSON notation, saying that this is a welcome message. So what we see over here is we've used a simple Jade template. We've used io.sockets. We are actually able to install io.sockets in a very, very simple manner, make an npm installation. We've used a Jade template to render, create a view where we are loading the JavaScript. So this is the client-side JavaScript, which is sent with the view, which makes a connection, and then based on the connection, it sends out a message. So I hope you guys, are able to follow. I understand it may be a little bit quick in terms of what we can cover in a webinar, but essentially the installation steps are very straightforward. And if you like, we can obviously send you these examples and send you further documentation and further steps if you want to know a little bit more about them. Our course, we will obviously cover a lot of it in depth. Now, before we end this, I'm going to show you another very simple example, which I've put up, which is a simple chat server, which we've, you can find a lot of examples, on GitHub. So if you go to GitHub, you're going to find a lot of packages, a lot of examples using Node.js, a lot of real-world applications and frameworks, templating frameworks, and so on. So the amount of community support that you'll find with Node.js is simply astounding, given that how new Node.js is. So I'm not going to go through the setup of the chat application. We will simply run the chat server. So as you can see, the chat server is running on 1337. So what we'll do over here is, oops, sorry. Okay, so just a little bit example. I'm just going to explain this chat application in a little bit more detail. What the application does is it's not using Express. It's not using Jade. It is a pure Node.js server. So the actual chat.html, and I can can look at the source code, right? Is a simple HTML which has it's calling frontend.js, which wherein actually lies the main WebSocket. Now, obviously, I don't expect you to go through this in about the 5 seconds, but the actual chat.html is being served by Apache, which has the client JavaScript coming here, right? Pure Node.js application. So say if I'm signed in as Andy, and I'm going to go to a different one where I sign in as Vinny. So if I'm typing here, hello. So as you can see it from there. So what this does is, so what this simple application is doing is it's sending the request to the Node backend, and what simply the Node server is doing is sending it back out to a different WebSocket, and everything is being shown on an HTML page. This is a very, very simple example using WebSockets. You can find this example in GitHub. It just shows that how easy and how quick it is to build such applications once you're aware of the fundamentals of Node.js.